Could the Dallas Cowboys select another round one receiver to pair with CeeDee Lamb? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we're taking a look at 3 first-round receivers that the Dallas Cowboys could potentially be interested in pairing with CeeDee Lamb. Before we even get to the players, Landon, I just want to say, I wanted to ask you, how likely do you think it is the Cowboys could draft another round one receiver?
You know, it certainly is a position that, you know, that is good to target in the first round. You definitely are going to get a noticeable level of talent at the first round versus where later in the other rounds, as opposed to like other positions where the gap may not be so different between the top and the middle class of that particular position. And for the Cowboys specifically, you know, I think they've got a situation where they've, you know, obviously let Michael Gallup go. They're about to pay CeeDee Lamb a whole bunch of money. Brandon Cooks is still on the team, but for only another year. So I think you look at the situation and you're not like, it's not like tackle or center where you're like feeling that you have to get out of this offseason with additional talent at the position. But I feel like if you didn't make any changes there, if you didn't draft anybody or sign any free agents, it would be kind of stale in the wide receiver room at that point. And really just like hoping on improvements from younger players, which, you know, I think is a route to go. But I definitely think that, you know, the Cowboys, if they want to remain a dangerous offense, they kind of need to kind of add more talent to this offense, different angles, and guys who can kind of complement the guys that are already, you know, on the roster.
All right, so let's take a look at some of the receivers that are going to go in round one. We're going to remove Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors. Like, those 3 guys are all going to be top 8 picks, top 9
Probably,
picks. So we don't need to concern ourselves with that. But let's look at the next group of receivers, and let's start with Brian Thomas from LSU, who is kind of widely considered the number 4 receiver in this class. What did you see from him when you put on the tape?
Yeah, prototype X receiver size. Like, he's high cut. He's got long arms. He's got big hands. He's a traits player for sure. He is big, fast, and coordinated, but not necessarily so refined. He basically, you know, with these kind of players, you know, with that kind of skill set, you can live on a pair of routes as long as they're complementary. And that's basically what he did, right? 2/3 of Brian's routes in 2023, I think it's 49 of 75 were on hitches and go routes, right? And just to kind of break that out a little bit, right? The go route is what gets the corner backed off of you, right? And the hitch is the way to counter that, right? Is that when they're playing you too far off, you run the hitch real quick, it's an easy 10 yards, and then you get some yak, right? So that, you know, we talk about sometimes with players having a complete system, right? Pass rushers having a pass rush move and then a counter, and how they're able to work those two against each other. That's kind of what this is with a go and a hitch route situation. And that's why Brian was able to kind of make a lot of hay basically on 2 routes almost the entire season. He's often is an easy tackle target. He's not like a huge yak guy necessarily, because he you know, he catches the ball and he's tall and he stands up and guys go to his legs and he falls down easily. But when he remembers to get low and kind of bend his ankles and hips, he has a little shake in his bake. You know, he can get around guys if he needs to. He can break out. You can see that a little bit in his routes as well. There is flexibility in his lower half that doesn't get used enough. And I think more reps to get him to consistently drop his way to the top of routes could be a source of some serious upside for him. Many folks pointed out that no one is pressing him, and I think it's with good reason. I first of all, college corners just don't do very much of that, and second of all, I can understand why that they're afraid of doing it. But NFL corners are not going to be afraid of that, so it's going to be interesting to see how he handles that. I actually think he might not be bad. Because his feet are very sudden in his release, and he's already hand fighting in routes. So I think he has the kind of the traits to be good at against press, but we just don't see it on the tape. He tracks the ball well despite his speed. There are several instances of him catching the ball way out in front of him. You see him there's lots of catches where he's just kind of really reaching far out, and he's managed to get his hands on the ball. He will lose concentration at times. There are times you see concentration drops, or you call them concentration drops, or they're drops where he's turning to look upfield to see where he needs to go once he has the hand in the ball and he forgets the ball, right? Where does he win? I mean, he's a deep threat right now. His game is based off of his ability to get down the field and create. There's more to his game, but that is the kind of base piece of what everything else works off of. And like I said, mostly right now it's go routes and hitches, and that is a complete system when you're playing opposite of Malik Neighbors, right? So the question is, and honestly, I think just to pull back a little bit, all three of these guys we're going to talk about today, my question is with all of these guys, what is the path to make them the main target on their offense? Because I don't know that it's immediately clear for any of these three guys. But I think for right now with Brian Thomas, you see a guy who could easily be a very, very high-end wide receiver too, who could get down the field, who could definitely immediately help a team just because of his traits. And then you hope that as he develops as a route runner, you can add more to his tool bag. He becomes a more complete receiver. My unanswered question is, how long will it take him to take the next step to being a more well-rounded route runner?
We just don't see very many of these receivers enter the NFL. I want to pull up his athletic testing again. He's 6'3", 210 pounds, and he ran a 4.33 40-yard dash. Now, we've seen some players of this size before come in the NFL. I'm thinking off the top of my head, like Stephen Hill, who came out of Georgia Tech, right? But a lot of those guys just aren't natural receivers, right? Like they're just really clumsy. I think Brian Thomas, you watch some of his tape, and some of the catches that he makes, his body control is really good. It's the route running part of it that makes me a little bit nervous. And most of his production came on slot fades. That's just basically how LSU used him. I could see him having a Christian Watson type role in the NFL early in his career where, hey, you're this big athletic guy. We're just going to send you down the field and make plays. But if everything clicks, I mean, maybe a little Demaryius Thomas
Yeah, I think PFF compared him to Martavius Bryant. I think that's a really great comparison as well. It's funny. It's because him and Ladd to me are both, and they're different types. They're both of a type of receiver, right? That are often you watch out for these types of receivers because they bust a lot, right? These kind of in his case, the bigger, taller, athletic guy that just is a specimen. It's a traits player, right? And I think in both cases, with both McConkey and with Brian Thomas, these happen, I feel like, to be outliers in a positive way for those types, right? Like Brian Thomas is a much better version of this player than really all the guys we just named. Really,
I was going to say Justin Hunter or Dorial Green Beckham. And these guys are going back a ways a little bit, but those are big athletic guys who you just worried, are they natural football players are they just athletes? I have got no concerns about Brian Thomas that way.
That's just that's exactly my point is that those guys, you compare them to those guys because that's the athletic comp. But the difference here is that, and it's funny because McConkey, it's the opposite, right? With Thomas, it's he compares athletically to all these other first and second round bust wide receivers that, didn't quite ever develop to what you wanted him to be. But the difference to me is that he's more refined than those guys. He has more skill than those guys. McConkey's the opposite. McConkey comes from a long line of slot skill guys who have the ability to get open, but the difference is that he's fast and he has athleticism that those guys don't have. So I think it's kind of similar in that sense that these are these are of types that are guys that kind of tend to bust a lot. But the difference is that you really do feel like these guys are outliers in that kind of subsection of those of that position.
All right, let's transition to Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver from Texas, who I'm going to just fully admit is the one player that I'm really struggling with in this class. I can't even say his name right. I'm struggling that bad. How would he fit the Dallas Cowboys at pick number 24? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to your busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a number one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even go pick who you think is going to win it all. We're down to the final 16 teams on the men's side. Should be a lot of fun next week as we get down to the final four. But go visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know about Locked On Sports Today. Are you tired of watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that unnecessary screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Landon, let's talk about Adonai Mitchell, AD Mitchell from Texas, another supreme athlete. What did you see when you turned on the tape?
First of all, let's mutually agree to call him AD Mitchell because I have a feeling I'm gonna have the same problem.
Yeah, AD.
Just stumbling over it. So AD, another guy kind of similarly sized, if a little bit slighter than what we talked about with Thomas, right? He's kind of prototype X sized. He's 6'2", and some change, but he's a bit slight, right? Or at least he was when he came into the combine.
He looks skinny,
but that was exactly right. Is that, I think it's funny. I watched this guy backwards. I saw him at the combine first in performing, right? And I heard all the talk about, man, it looks like he lost some weight. He looks skinny, but the truth is he looks like that on tape too. He looks like he's skinny on tape. He has above average arm length, but he does have kind of smaller hands. He has elite explosion for the position. And you see it in the way he comes out of his breaks. You see it in the way he gets off the line of scrimmage. It's like that easy speed, it just looks like he's not trying very hard, but he's moving very fast. You really noticed it when they did the overlay 40s between AD and like Julio Jones and AJ Green. And like those guys are like pumping their arms and they're like, and here's AD like a whole body length ahead of them the entire time, basically just like he's out for a walk, speed. Right? Yeah. He's speed walking, right? Small hands aren't always an issue for wide receiver. They can be, but as long as their hands are strong, it doesn't always manifest itself. I have concerns that he doesn't have strong hands though, because I think you see him go up and get jump balls. You see him make kind of that kind of catch, right? But when hands are on him, when people are being physical with him, he doesn't always come down with the football.
I'll mention really quickly. There was a play. Actually, there was two plays against Alabama where Terrion Arnold basically went through his back, and there's no way a big receiver should ever let that happen. And both times Arnold knocked the ball away, despite having horrific position on the play.
And on that same game, I think it may have been some other game. They forced a fumble on him where he was just kind of carrying the ball like a breadbasket. And the thing is about it is that it's like you don't see problems with him catching the ball kind of outside of his frames, or having issues with other types of catches. So he has reliable hands. It's more just that they're not strong enough to kind of hold on to when he's being, wrestled with or punched at, or the ball's being scraped at when they're, kind of coming down with the catch. So he does see and track the ball well. So the ball skills overall are not an issue with this guy.
No.
He has reliable hands, has a huge catch radius outside of his body. He doesn't have necessarily a huge catch radius outside of his body, but what he does is he makes up for that by being so explosive and he's able to put his body where it needs to be in order for him to make the catches. He can be slippery, but he isn't really a tackle breaker. He will.
Here's the numbers here from PFF. If you're watching it on YouTube right now, 3rd percentile in the country in yards after the catch per reception. Like, not only is he not good after the catch, like he's historically bad for somebody who's going to go in the first round.
And you see it on tape. It's like he gets tackled by the first guy who gets their hands on him, and he goes down.
Which is the biggest difference for me. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, please.
This is I've seen some people compare him to CeeDee Lamb, like coming out of the Big 12. That's the biggest difference between CeeDee Lamb and Adonai Mitchell is CeeDee was all-time great after the catch, and he still is in the NFL. Mitchell is not. And it's just a big knock on his game. And one of the questions that I have, Landon, is if you're this good of an athlete, again, you are a 99.9 percentile athlete. How are there, of his last 20 games, 13 games where he was held under 47 yards? Like, how are you going? Yeah, how are you going that many games basically being shut out?
Hollow bones, it's the only thing I can come up with. Like, he basically is just, he can't. And I think it's gonna limit his kind of upside in the NFL a lot, because if he's unable to get yards after catch, it really, and I think the other thing too is that they're able to kind of, really keep him in a box, because he didn't run a ton of, he ran in routes and he ran some and slants, but he never ran posts, and he's mostly an X receiver, right? So it's like, if you can't send him across the middle, and I think you can, like, he's not afraid to go across the middle, but the issue is that normally you can get the ball to a guy on a post and he's running through the secondary and he's gone, right? Like, unless he's got a completely clear runway, he's not taking those to the house. So I just think that he doesn't get the benefits of, like, he's not a good screen catcher guy, because he can't break tackles. He's not a good short yard. Like, there isn't an element of getting the ball short and then creating to his game.
No,
and I think
there was a couple times. Yeah, there was a couple times that Texas ran like reverses or jet sweeps to him.
Yes,
and it was a disaster. Like, I don't understand. I struggle with him so much because you see the athleticism, you see the size, and there was 3 games in his college career where he had 90 or more yards. Like, why isn't he putting everything together? Is it because of the quarterback play? I know I posted this on Twitter, and a lot of people said it's the quarterback play. There's also, and you can see this on tape, there's a lack of effort from him when he knows the ball isn't coming to him. He just doesn't care, and that concerns me.
Yeah, and I do think that the quarterback thing is reasonable, because you do see that on tape. Like, you see that he's having to slow down to catch the ball. He's having to stop his route to catch the ball. You don't even have to do that. You can just watch the tape and see that there are 3 different human beings throwing him the football, right? Like, I think he is kind of a little bit of a difficult evaluation. But to me, what I held on to is that he's a really great route runner. He does it, and he runs his routes very fast, like with very good pace. So I do think, again, back to my overall question with this class, I believe he could be a fantastic second target, second receiver, second, a passing target, however you want to, label that. Where is he going to go to become the focus of his offense, right? Where is he going to get better at yards after catch? Is he going to get better in the short game through that? Like, where does his game develop in order for him to be the man of an NFL offense? Because I just don't see it right now.
Although at the same time, like, we've been talking about trying to find a true X receiver to pair with CeeDee Lamb.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think of these 3, he's the best. I think he probably projects the best as an X receiver, and he does run really good routes. He reminds me a lot of George Pickens, who came out of Georgia, which Adonai Mitchell, by the way, played at Georgia in 2022. Is he worth the 24th overall pick, or is that probably maybe a little bit higher than he should go?
And this is kind of the 10,000-foot question for these guys. Are these types of receivers worth a late first-round pick? If you're not getting a guy who's going to be the guy, is it worth taking in the first round? And I would say that it is, because offense is so important nowadays, and the passing game specifically so important nowadays. You need to have complements in your passing game. You need guys like this specifically, right? Like all three of these guys really, to be talented enough that if CeeDee Lamb's out for 2 games, you're not going to rely on AD Mitchell for an entire season to be the number 1 receiver. No. But I bet I can rely on AD Mitchell for 2 games to be the number 1 receiver, right? If we created a game plan around what he does well. Now, would that game plan be usable for all 17 games? No, probably not, because he's not versatile enough of a player to kind of work around what defenses are doing. But I think if you had to make AD Mitchell or Brian Thomas or Ladd McConkey the main focus of your passing attack for a week or 2 while your wide receiver 1 is out, he could survive. And then on top of that, be a very, very valuable piece of your offense while pulling away attention. While pulled away attention is going elsewhere, they'll be able to kind of produce at a high level. And I believe that actually about all 3 of these guys.
So you've mentioned him a couple times. Let's talk about Ladd McConkey, who played with AD Mitchell at Georgia and outproduced him. We will get to him next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are discussing some receivers that the Dallas Cowboys could target at pick number 24 in round 1. We've discussed Brian Thomas. We've discussed AD Mitchell. How about Ladd McConkey from Georgia, whose stock just continues to rise?
Yeah, I mean, this is the guy that's more of the undersized Z slot body type. And even for a slot Z guy, he's undersized. He is just a tad under 6 feet. Under 190 pounds, under 9-inch hands, and just over 30-inch arms. Those are all very, very small numbers. I mean, you're seeing it right here. If you're watching on YouTube, the RAS score, his composite size grade is not good, but he makes up for it with those other 2 sections, right? And on top of that, he is a very good athlete. We'll get into that in a second, but the headline with this guy is he's a skilled, productive, and relied upon veteran receiver on a national championship team. He is a high floor prospect, right? Like I think we could talk about a lot of other different actors. We're going to, because he is similar to a lot of these guys that you've seen come out. There's going to be the aspect of him being a short white guy that everyone's got their kind of ideas of what he can and can't do. But I think, the bottom line is he is going to be a very high floor player. I think he can come in and be very useful for a team. He plays, I think the first thing you notice about him, he plays with a pace and a speed that makes your butt tighten up if you're a defender, because you're just like, it's so fast. It's so, everything's done with such urgency that it's like you're constantly playing on your back feet, and you're just like, there's no moment for kind of taking a second to check his hips, to check where the play is. I think he puts a lot of stress on defenders because of the way he runs his routes. The difference between McConkey and these other kind of typical slot guys is absolute top of class speed. Like that's, to me, like the big difference between him and some of these other under 6 foot slot guys who are going to, can pick up a first down, who can get open, who can create separation. He can do all those things. And then on top of that, he runs a sub 4.35 40. And I think that's really and I think that what that does is that opens up his opportunities on the outside, right? If you want him to play on the outside and to play as a Z, he can do that. And now he's not just relied on in the slot. He generates yak using start stop with the ball in his hands. He's dangerous underneath or in the flats when he has room to work. His game and body type combo has been real hit and miss in the NFL. This is kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? Is he has the look of a guy that kind of busts a lot, but the difference is that he really does feel like he has outliers, both in his production, his speed, and then some negative outliers too. His hand size is, you see the guys that make it, that are kind of those slot guys, they usually have kind of big hands for their size, right? Because they can reel it in. They're reliable hand catchers. McConkey is a reliable catcher, but he doesn't have big hands. And that was the other thing I was going to say. He does have reliable hands, but a small catch radius, versatile, balanced game, good to great at most aspects of the position outside of contested catch or balls outside of his catch radius. Where does he win? Speed and precision is his game. Essentially, he's very tight route runner, but he runs it with a level of urgency that kind of takes it to another level. Unanswered questions, lots of mixed signal about his profile. And, that's the issue to me, is that you've seen this guy come into the league a lot, and you've seen a lot of these guys not, have huge years, or they are these undrafted free agents because they're not athletes who surprise you, right? It's Cole Beasley, or it's this. The difference here is that this guy is those guys, except with 5-star recruit athleticism. And the question is, like, we haven't seen a guy like this before. Honestly, the guy that I felt like that was the closest watch to him, and I hate to scare everybody here, is Andy Isabella, right? Where, like, he's a guy with good speed who plays in the slot, except I think the difference is that he is a much, much more refined player than Andy was. And that's why he's a little bit of a tough evaluation. I think he eventually made it into the bottom of the first round because there's so many things that you look at, you're like, I don't think he should be. And then finally you just watch him, and you're like, all right, I get you got me. That's fine. You're bottom of the first round because he's just so consistently good and does everything so well. It's hard to deny him.
Well, and the difference between him compared to like Andy Isabella is he played in the SEC, right? And
that's the other thing, right? Yeah. It's the pedigree is this. It's hard to deny, right? The fact that he was able to do all this in the SEC at the best school in college football is pretty amazing.
It also makes me feel better that he went to the Senior Bowl and just shredded every corner that they had there. Like, it's just he checks a box for me. This is the type of receiver that I've been begging the Cowboys to find for Dak Prescott for the last 6 years. So, like, CeeDee Lamb is your number one, but find that other guy that can get open consistently on routes within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage that have a little bit of quickness. Now, like, I think we saw it in the second half of last year with Brandon Cooks, but Brandon Cooks is a lot smaller than what Ladd McConkey is, right? Like, it's crazy. It's not when I was watching him, I know it's really hard. It's really easy to make like hey, he's Cooper Kupp or he's Colby. Like, those are just terrible comms.
Yeah.
I wrote down Emmanuel Sanders, where Emmanuel Sanders was that inside outside receiver who was sub 6 foot, sub 190 pounds, but just got open all the time. Good after the catch, not dynamic, but good enough after the catch to make teams have to worry about you. Profiles as like a high end number 2 receiver.
Yep.
I don't know, Landon, if Ladd McConkey is worth the 24th pick in the draft, but I would feel really good about the Cowboys offense if he was their number 2 receiver and you had Jake Ferguson working in the slot. Like, I would feel awesome about their offense.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you've got a plan for this guy, you're getting value out of that pick, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I have a hard time seeing this guy getting drafted and then, not giving you anything. And I think that that's some of the fear that you have with these types of players. When they bust hard, man.
Yeah.
Like, because you can't fit them in anywhere. If they can't find a way to get open, they're not big enough to be useful as an outside receiver. It's like suddenly they can't even make the roster because they can't play special teams or any of that, right? I don't have that fear with McConkey. Like, if you're drafting McConkey, you're getting a starting wide receiver, like, without a doubt. The question to me is, where's the ceiling here, right? Because
is he somebody who you could ever build your offense around? Probably not. But I do think could you give him 115 targets in a season because he just gets open all the time?
Maybe.
I think so.
Especially if someone's pulling a bunch of attention away from him.
Exactly.
He could be a guy that is an incredibly high volume receiver simply because no one wants Dak throwing the football to CeeDee Lamb, So I think that's this. It's funny because all 3 of these guys are very different, right? But all 3 of them seem to fit that sort of thing. And that's why we're here at the bottom of the first round talking about selecting the guys. If these guys were, world beaters, if these guys were defense destroyers, these are the guys that made defensive coordinators lose sleep at night because they just have no plan. They would be in the first. They'd be in the top of the first round, right?
Yeah.
They'd be in the top 10. They'd be in the top 15. These guys have one or two warts to their game that make them not kind of the universal destroyers of world that these other guys are. But when given opportunities, when given one-on-one chances, when getting the ball in their hands, these guys can make things happen at a dynamic way that you just don't see these middle round type wide receivers do.
Right.
So it's kind of like they are sort of caught in between these two worlds of being not quite the elite of the elite, but certainly shouldn't be lumped in with kind of the middle class of wide receivers that you get in the late second, third round.
Really quickly, before we go, can you stack these receivers in the way that you would like the Cowboys to draft them?
I think it's hard. I honestly would be thrilled with any three of these three guys because I think all three of them fit really well for what the Cowboys wanted to. But I would probably go Thomas McConkey Mitchell, maybe.
Yeah, it's for me, Thomas is so clearly the first one here just because he's the rarest of the three.
Well, he comes in with a ready to go skill set for the NFL. Like he can produce immediately with that skill.
I probably would go Thomas, Mitchell, McConkey, but the last two are really close for me where you could talk me into either one of those guys at 24.
Yeah, I'm not upset about drafting any of these three guys. I think all of them would be great fits, especially as kind of second option weapons for the Cowboys.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the YouTube channel. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.